On my 79th birthday, my daughter-in-law handed me a beautifully wrapped box of artisan chocolates, with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. The next morning, she called me, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, asking if I had tried them yet. I took a slow breath and told her the truth. I said I do not eat sweets, Monica, so I gave the entire box to my accountant Victor to take home to his kids. The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was the breathless, terrifying silence of a predator realizing the trap had snapped shut on the wrong leg. I could hear the faint sound of traffic in the background on her end, but she did not speak. I could hear her breathing hitch in her throat. She hung up without another word, leaving me listening to the empty static of the connection. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with greedy family members who thought they could outsmart you. Now let me explain exactly how a simple birthday present almost cost me $18 million and my freedom. I am Harrison. I spent 40 years in Dallas, Texas building commercial real estate from the dirt up. I am not a foolish man, but lately my family has decided to treat me like one. 3 months ago, I had a total hip replacement. Since then, I have had to use a cane to get around. To my son Bradley and his wife Monica, that metal cane was a signal. It told them I was weak, fragile, and most importantly, nearing the end of my usefulness in this world. They looked at my gray hair and my slower pace and assumed my brain had deteriorated along with my joints. They were dead wrong. I sat in my quiet living room that morning listening to the dial tone humming in my ear after Monica abruptly ended our call. I placed the phone down on the mahogany side table and picked up my tablet. I opened my financial portfolio. Staring back at me was the balance of my family trust fund. $18 million. A lifetime of sweat, late nights, and ruthless negotiations, all neatly categorized in digital ink on a glowing screen. The trust had a very specific legal clause. Every 5 years, I had to sign a medical and legal renewal proving my capacity to manage the estate. That renewal signing was scheduled for this coming Friday. If I was somehow deemed mentally unfit, the absolute control of that $18 million would automatically pass to my son Bradley. And where Bradley went, Monica steered the ship. She was the director of a high-end art gallery, a woman who wore designer clothes and spoke in carefully curated, polite sentences. But beneath that polished exterior, I always sensed a quiet, calculating desperation. I sat there, tapping my fingers against my cane, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Why was she so panicked about a simple box of chocolates going to my accountant? Victor had been my trusted financial advisor and close friend for 30 years. He was a sharp, meticulous man who knew every penny I owned. Giving him a gift was perfectly normal. Her reaction was not normal. It was the reaction of a woman whose carefully laid plans had just derailed. I did not have to wait long for the next piece of the puzzle. Exactly 20 minutes after she hung up the phone, I heard the distinct sound of tires aggressively turning into my driveway. The tires scraped against the concrete, followed by the slam of a car door. The heavy oak front door swung open a moment later, without anyone even ringing the bell. Monica stood in the foyer, and she looked nothing like the perfectly put-together woman I knew. Her blonde hair was slightly disheveled. Her chest was heaving as she tried to catch her breath, and tiny beads of sweat were visible on her forehead. She had practically run from her expensive imported car to my front door. "Dad," she gasped, forcing a nervous laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping across pavement. "I am so glad I caught you. I was just in the neighborhood and realized I needed to tell you something incredibly important about your gift." I remained seated in my leather recliner, my tablet resting casually on my lap. I looked at her mildly, acting the part of the slow, confused old man she fully expected me to be. "Is that so?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You seemed to be in quite a hurry to get off the phone earlier." She waved her hand dismissively, walking further into the room and pacing across the Persian rug. "Oh, I just had a very important client walk into the gallery. It was nothing. But Dad, please listen to me. About those chocolates. You really gave them to Victor. I nodded slowly, leaning back into the leather cushions. I did. He stopped by early this morning to drop off some tax documents. You know my stomach cannot handle rich foods anymore. I figured his grandchildren would enjoy them. Monica's eyes darted wildly around the room before locking onto mine with an intensity that bordered on madness. Dad, you need to call him right now. You need to tell him not to eat them under any circumstances. I leaned forward, resting my hands heavily on the head of my cane. Why is that, Monica? Are they expired? Did you buy me bad chocolate? No, of course not. She stammered, her manicured fingers twisting the strap of her expensive leather purse. They are specially made. I bought them from a holistic health boutique downtown. They contain a very high dose of cannabis extract CBD and some extremely powerful herbal sleep aids. The clerk told me they work wonders for elderly patients recovering from surgery. I thought they would help you sleep through the terrible pain in your hip. But if Victor eats them while he is driving to work, he could pass out at the wheel. He could get into a terrible accident, Dad. We could be held liable for his injuries. It was a brilliant lie. It was incredibly plausible. It painted her as a deeply caring daughter-in-law who just wanted to help her father-in-law manage his chronic pain. It also created an urgent, completely believable excuse for why she was in an absolute state of panic right now. A lesser man would have believed her instantly. A lesser man would have picked up the phone in a frantic rush to save his loyal friend from a deadly car crash. But I spent 4 decades dealing with shady contractors, corrupt city officials, and slick corporate lawyers. I knew what a lie looked like. And more importantly, I knew what raw, unfiltered fear looked like. Monica was not afraid for Victor's personal safety. She was terrified of what Victor would find inside that box. You must call him Dad, she pressed, stepping closer to my chair, her voice rising in pitch and echoing in the large room. Or give me his number right now. Where does he live? I will drive over there myself and intercept him. Please, Dad, this is a life or death situation. I stared into her wide, desperate eyes. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I knew right then and there that the polite family dynamic we had maintained for years was completely over. We were standing on a battlefield, and she had just fired the first shot directly at me. I looked at her trembling hands and offered a warm, reassuring smile, the kind of smile an oblivious old man gives when he does not understand the danger he is in. Oh, Monica, I said softly, I had no idea. Of course I will call him right now. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out my mobile phone. My fingers are so stiff today, I muttered, purposely fumbling with the screen. I put on my reading glasses, deliberately taking my time. Monica stood frozen, her eyes tracking every movement of my thumbs. She was practically vibrating with nervous energy. I dialed Victor's number, but instead of his primary cell, I dialed his office line. I knew he was out on the golf course today, and his office line went straight to an automated answering service on the weekends. The phone rang twice and the recording beeped. I held the phone up to my ear and spoke loudly. Victor, it is Harrison. Listen, my boy, Monica just came by and told me those chocolates have some strong herbal medicine in them. Do not eat them, and for heaven's sake, do not let the grandkids near them. Give me a call back when you get this. I pressed the red button to end the call and looked up at my daughter-in-law. There, I said. He always checks his messages. I am sure it will be fine. Monica let out a breath so heavy it was practically a sob. Her shoulders slumped, and the fake, polite mask slid right back onto her face. Thank you, Dad, she said, pressing a hand to her chest. I was just so worried. You know how much I care about you and your friends. I told her I appreciated her concern and watched as she turned and walked out the front door. I did not move from my comfortable chair. I sat perfectly still, listening to the heavy wooden door click shut. I listened to her heels click rapidly down the concrete front walkway. I waited until I heard the engine of her car start and the tires back out of my driveway. The moment the sound of her expensive vehicle faded down the street, the trembling in my stiff fingers miraculously stopped. My posture straightened. The confused elderly father vanished, leaving only the man who had survived 4 decades in the cutthroat real estate business. I picked up my phone again. This time I bypassed the standard dialer and opened an encrypted communication application Victor and I used for sensitive corporate acquisitions. I dialed his direct personal number. He answered on the very first ring. "Harrison," he said, sounding completely out of breath. "I am on the 9th hole. What is going on?" "Victor," I said, my voice dropping to a low, deadly whisper, "where is the box I gave you?" He sounded deeply confused. "It is in the passenger seat of my car. I have not touched it." "Why?" "Listen to me very carefully," I told him. "Do not open it. Do not eat anything inside it. I need you to leave the golf course right now. Take that box to the private toxicologist we used during the environmental soil dispute last year. Tell them I want a complete chemical breakdown of whatever is inside those chocolates. I do not care what it costs. Pay double for a 24-hour rush." Victor was silent for a moment. The easygoing tone of a man enjoying his sunny Saturday morning vanished entirely. When he spoke again, he was all business. "Understood," he said. "I am heading there now." I ended the call and set the phone down on the wooden table. The house was entirely silent, but my mind was racing like a speeding freight train. If Monica had wanted to physically harm me, she would not have used something as slow and unpredictable as a supposed herbal sleep aid. No, this was a tactical strike. This was a calculated move with a very specific and immediate objective. I needed to understand the timeline. Why now? Why this specific week? I stood up from my chair, gripping my cane tightly. I did not actually need it as much as I pretended to, but keeping up the illusion of extreme frailty was now a matter of ultimate survival. I walked slowly down the long hallway to my home office. I closed the heavy double doors, locked them securely, and turned on the small brass desk lamp. The warm glow illuminated shelves filled with binders and legal documents spanning my entire professional career. I went straight to the heavy fireproof safe resting in the dark corner. I spun the combination lock, opened the heavy steel door, and pulled out the thick black binder labeled Estate and Trust. I carried it to my desk and opened it carefully. I spent the next 6 grueling hours reading every single line of the massive legal framework I had meticulously built to protect my family. I drank 3 cups of black coffee, turning page after page. Around 2 in the morning, I finally found what I was searching for. It was a single paragraph buried deep in the 3rd section of the conservatorship trust agreement. The trust currently held $18 million in liquid assets and commercial property. The specific clause stated that every 5 years, the trust automatically renewed with me as the sole acting executor. However, if I was deemed medically or legally incapacitated by a certified physician, my son Bradley would assume immediate and total emergency power of attorney. He would instantly have absolute unyielding control over every single dollar. I checked the calendar sitting on my desk. Today was Saturday. The automatic legal renewal signing was scheduled for this coming Friday. The scattered pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. If I was legally found to be losing my mind this week, I would lose everything. The phone rang. It was Victor. I answered the phone with a sharp breath. The voice on the other end was tight. "I am pulling into the alley behind your house right now," Victor said. "Open the back door and make sure nobody sees." I hung up and walked through the dark house toward the kitchen. The morning light was just beginning to seep through the curtains. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the oak door open. Victor stepped inside immediately. The crisp air swept in with him, carrying a faint scent of motor oil. He did not look like the composed accountant I had known for 3 decades. His tie was loosened, and his face was drained of color. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Under his left arm, he clutched a yellow envelope. He did not say a word as I closed the door and locked it. We walked in absolute silence to the kitchen island. Victor tossed the envelope onto the marble surface. It landed with a heavy smack. I paid the chief toxicologist double to run the tests personally. Victor said, his voice trembling. He stayed up all night running the breakdown on every piece of chocolate in that box. He thought I was crazy until the third test came back with the same result. I looked at the envelope but did not touch it. "Tell me what he found," I said, keeping my voice low. Victor leaned against the counter, rubbing his tired face. "There was no cannabis extract in there, Harrison. There was no chamomile and no herbal sleep aids. Those chocolates were laced with a synthetic chemical called haloperidol." "What is haloperidol?" I asked, unfamiliar with the name. Victor swallowed hard. "It is a powerful first-generation antipsychotic medication. It is used in psychiatric wards to treat severe schizophrenia and acute manic episodes. It is incredibly potent and strictly regulated." The toxicologist explained what a dose that large would do to a healthy 79-year-old man. Victor continued, his voice growing thicker. "Within an hour of eating 2 chocolates, you would experience severe neurological side effects. Your hands would shake violently and you would lose your sense of balance. Your speech would become slurred and completely incoherent. You would experience intense confusion, memory loss, and terrifying auditory hallucinations. In short, Harrison, it would look exactly like you were experiencing the rapid onset of severe dementia." The words hung in the quiet air like a cloud of toxic smoke. I stared at the envelope and felt a profound emptiness settle in my chest. My daughter-in-law purchased pharmaceutical-grade antipsychotics, laced them into a gift, and handed it to me with a warm smile. She wanted to chemically destroy my mind. She wanted to trap me inside a hallucinating, trembling shell of my own body. "And she wanted to do it now," I whispered, piecing the fragments of the puzzle together. "The trust renewal is this Friday. If she and Bradley get a doctor in this house while I am sedated, they can document that I am no longer in control of my faculties. They would not even need a lengthy court battle. A single medical evaluation would instantly trigger the emergency power of attorney clause. Bradley would gain total control of $18 million, and I would be locked away in a high-security facility for the rest of my medicated life." Victor slammed his fist onto the marble counter. "This is attempted murder," he hissed, his face turning dark red. "This is felony elder abuse. I am calling the police right now. We are giving this report to the district attorney, and I am going to watch them drag that wicked woman out in handcuffs." He pulled out his phone aggressively, jabbing at the screen. "No," I said, my voice cracking like a whip. "Put the phone down, Victor." He froze, looking at me as if I had suddenly lost my mind. "Are you joking?" he demanded. "She tried to poison you." I took a step closer, resting both hands on my cane. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "If you call the police right now, what exactly happens? The police will go to Monica. She will burst into tears. She will tell the detectives she bought those chocolates from a random holistic store and that she is a tragic victim of a contaminated product. She will hire expensive defense lawyers and claim she had no idea there were antipsychotics inside. We might ruin her reputation, but we will not put her in federal prison. Plausible deniability is her shield, and right now we lack the evidence to pierce it." Victor stared at me, his chest heaving. "So what do we do?" he asked, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Do we just sit here and wait for her to try again?" "No," I replied, a cold, dark resolve hardening inside me. "We give her exactly what she wants. We let her think she has won." I looked down at the lab report, and then back up at my oldest friend. "I am going to eat the bait, Victor, metaphorically speaking. She expects me to be consuming those poisoned chocolates over the next few days. She expects my cognitive abilities to rapidly decline. I am going to give her the performance of a lifetime. I need them to feel confident. I need them to get incredibly comfortable so they make a fatal mistake and show me their entire hand." I walked over to the kitchen phone mounted on the wall. "What are you doing?" Victor asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I am calling right now to invite my loving son and my wonderful daughter-in-law over for a nice family dinner tomorrow night," I said, dialing the numbers. "I am going to show them their medicine is working beautifully. I am going to let them step into the trap." I spent Sunday preparing my stage. When the doorbell rang at 7 on Monday evening, I was ready. I shuffled to the foyer, leaning on my cane, dragging my foot. I opened the door to find Bradley and Monica standing on the porch. Bradley looked sharp in a navy suit, holding expensive wine. Monica wore a silk blouse, projecting the perfect image of a devoted family member. "Come in," I mumbled, keeping my eyes unfocused. I stepped back, allowing them into the house. As Bradley walked past me, he paused and looked at my chest. "Dad," he said, a hint of patronizing concern lacing his voice, "you put your sweater on inside out." I looked down, feigning confusion. I ran my shaking hands over the exposed seams, as if I had no idea how the mistake happened. "Oh," I said, letting my voice waver. "How silly of me. My eyes must be getting worse. I suppose I was just in a rush to see you both." Monica stepped forward, placing a manicured hand on my shoulder. "It is perfectly fine, Dad," she cooed, her voice thick with fake sympathy. "You just need to sit down and rest. We brought dinner, so do not worry." We moved into the formal dining room. The mahogany table felt vast. Monica unpacked gourmet meals while Bradley poured red wine. I watched my son closely as he settled into his chair. Bradley was 50 years old, but he still acted like a young man, desperately trying to prove his worth. He was a vice president at a hedge fund, but his salary never covered his lifestyle. As we ate, the conversation drifted toward his work. "The market has been incredibly volatile lately," Dad Bradley said, swirling the wine in his glass. "My firm is handling the pressure, but some of our high-yield portfolios took a massive hit last quarter. We are restructuring right now, but honestly, the pressure is immense. You know how it is in business. You have to spend huge money to make real money." I nodded slowly, taking a clumsy bite of my chicken. "Are you and Monica doing all right financially?" I asked, my voice deliberately slow and trembling. "You bought that vacation home last month." Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his seat, loosening his silk tie. "Oh, we are fine, Dad," he replied quickly, though his smile did not reach his eyes. "We just have a few temporary cash flow issues to manage. The country club raised their annual dues, and the lease on Monica's luxury SUV was higher than expected. But the corporate bonuses will come through soon. I just need to hold on for a little while longer." I knew exactly what a little while longer meant in his world. He was drowning in suffocating debt and looking for a permanent financial lifeline. It was time to escalate my careful performance. I reached for my water glass, but purposely misjudged the distance. My trembling fingers hit the hard side of the crystal goblet, sending it tipping over. Ice-cold water spilled rapidly across the white tablecloth, soaking into the expensive fabric and dripping loudly onto the hardwood floor. "Oh dear," I muttered, pulling my hands back to my chest and looking around the room in exaggerated panic. "I am so sorry. I do not know what is wrong with my hands today. They just will not listen to me anymore." Monica jumped up from her chair, grabbing a thick cloth napkin to dab frantically at the spreading puddle. "It is okay, Dad," she said, her tone instantly shifting from fake sympathy to barely concealed sharp irritation. "I have got it. Just stay completely still." I looked up at her, blinking my eyes rapidly to simulate total mental disorientation. "Thank you, Lillian," I whispered softly. The room went completely silent. Lillian was my wife. She passed away 12 years ago. Bradley froze instantly, with his silver fork hovering halfway to his open mouth. Monica stopped wiping the wet table and stared down at me. "Who did you just call me?" she asked, her voice dropping. I tilted my head, looking up at her with blank, innocent eyes. "I said thank you, Lillian," I repeated, my voice cracking perfectly. "You always take such good care of me." "Why are you looking at me like that, Lillian?" Bradley and Monica exchanged a tense glance that I could not read. I needed to clearly see their faces without them knowing I was watching. "Oh, I dropped my cloth napkin," I mumbled, breaking the heavy silence. I slowly leaned over the side of my chair, acting as if my stiff joints were causing me immense physical pain. I reached blindly down toward the floor, giving them the perfect opportunity to communicate without speaking a single word. Directly behind my chair stood a large antique glass display cabinet that housed Lillian's fine china collection. From my angled position near the hardwood floor, the dark glass acted exactly like a perfect mirror. I glanced quietly up at the reflection. What I saw sent a block of pure, solid ice straight through my veins. Monica was looking across the table at Bradley with a wide, terrifyingly predatory smile. Her dark eyes were lit up with a wicked, manic thrill. She did not look worried for my declining health. She looked victorious. And then I watched the clear reflection of my only son, the boy I had lovingly raised and provided for his entire life. Bradley looked back at his wife, a smug, satisfied expression settling firmly onto his face. He slowly raised his right hand and gave her a subtle, decisive thumbs up. My heart stopped beating. Bradley was not a clueless, innocent bystander. He was not just waiting for the money to eventually fall into his lap. He knew exactly what toxic poison was hidden inside those chocolates. My own flesh and blood was an active, willing participant in the evil plot to destroy my mind. After dinner, I let my chin rest heavily on my chest. I let out a ragged sigh and let my eyelids droop. Bradley and Monica guided me from the dining room into the living room with an aggressive kind of gentleness. They pushed me into my recliner. I let my arms fall limp over the padded sides. I slowed my breathing deliberately, making it sound shallow and labored. I closed my eyes completely and let my jaw hang slack. The television murmured softly, but the real show was in my living room. I heard the clinking of wine glasses as Monica and Bradley stood just a few feet away from my chair. They stood there watching me like vultures circling a dying animal. "He is out," Monica whispered, her voice devoid of warmth. "How many did you give him?" Bradley asked, his tone hushed and eager. "I swapped the box," she replied. "If he ate 2 today, he will not wake up until tomorrow. Check the office. See if the safe is unlocked." I heard his shoes pivot on the hardwood floor. His footsteps faded down the hallway toward my study. Monica remained in the living room. I opened my right eye just a millimeter. Through the blur of my eyelashes, I saw her standing near the mantelpiece. She casually picked up silver picture frames, examining them and setting them down with careless disregard. These were photographs of Lillian and me holding Bradley. Monica looked at them with utter boredom. She wiped her fingers on her skirt, as if touching my memories had soiled her hands. 10 minutes later, Bradley returned. His footsteps were heavy and frustrated. "He locked it," he muttered angrily. "The handle will not even budge. I tried the code, but he changed it again." Monica sighed softly, her annoyance clear. "It does not matter," she whispered back. "By Friday, we will not need the code. We will hire a locksmith to drill it open. Let us get out of here. It smells like old medicine in this house." I remained still as they gathered their coats. I listened to the front door click shut. I waited 5 full minutes in absolute silence before I finally opened my eyes. The betrayal settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. My own flesh and blood wanted to drill open my safe and erase my existence. I stood up from the recliner, my joints popping in the quiet room. There was no time for sorrow. Sorrow is a luxury for people who are not in the middle of a war. I walked to the hall closet and pulled out a small black tactical case I kept hidden on the top shelf. Inside were 4 wireless microcameras. I had purchased them a year ago, intending to use them to monitor the night shifts at my commercial property sites. Now they were going to save my life. I grabbed a small aluminum stepladder and carried it into the living room. I positioned it directly beneath the smoke detector mounted on the ceiling. My hands were perfectly steady as I popped the white plastic cover off the detector. I wired the tiny camera lens directly into the small ventilation grill, angling it to capture the entire seating area and the front entryway. I connected the power source to the internal battery pack and snapped the cover back into place. Next, I moved down the hallway to my home office. This was the true heart of my financial empire. If Bradley wanted the safe, he would inevitably come back here. I knelt beside the cylindrical air purifier, humming quietly in the dark corner. I carefully removed the back panel and wedged the second micro camera just above the thick carbon filter. I adjusted the tiny black lens until it had a clear, unobstructed panoramic view of my mahogany desk and the heavy fireproof safe sitting directly behind it. I synced both devices to my tablet, securing the connection with an encrypted passcode. I spent the rest of the night testing the video feeds. The picture quality was pristine, capturing every shadow. When the sun finally began to rise, casting a pale gray light through the tall windows, I retreated to my master bedroom. I changed into my sleepwear and climbed under the heavy down comforter. I needed to maintain the absolute illusion of cognitive decline. If Bradley or Monica called, I would not answer the phone. Let them think the dose of haloperidol had rendered me completely bedridden. I propped my pillows up against the wooden headboard and pulled the thick blankets to my chest. I rested my tablet on my lap, keeping the screen brightness turned down low. The live video feeds from the living room and the office were displayed side by side in perfect high-definition clarity. The house was dead quiet. I lay there for hours watching the dust motes dance in the morning light on the screen. My heart beat in a slow, measured rhythm. Then, right around 10 o'clock, the silent motion sensor alert flashed across my screen. I focused all my attention on the living room feed. The brass front door handle turned slowly. The heavy door pushed open without a single sound. It was Bradley. He was entirely alone. He did not call out my name to say hello. He did not head toward my bedroom to check if his father was breathing. He looked absolutely frantic. His expensive silk tie was missing, and his hair was wildly unkempt. He closed the door gently behind him and looked around the empty living room with wide, desperate eyes like a trapped animal. Then he moved. He walked with urgent, hurried steps straight past the kitchen and down the long hallway. I shifted my gaze to the second camera feed. A moment later, Bradley burst into my home office. He was a man possessed by a terrifying panic and heading straight for my locked safe. I silently watched the tablet screen as Bradley threw himself at my heavy mahogany desk. He did not even bother to turn on the overhead lights. He operated in the dim gray shadows of the morning, relying on the pale sunlight filtering through the wooden blinds. He grabbed the brass handle of the top right drawer and yanked it open with such violent force that the wood groaned. He began tossing my filed folders onto the floor. Tax returns, insurance policies, and old building permits scattered across the Persian rug. He was panting, like a cornered animal, sweating through his dress shirt. He moved to the next drawer, his hands trembling, as he rummaged through my pens, looking for the small brass key that opened the hidden compartment of my fireproof safe. I lay still in my bed, my heart turning into a block of solid ice. This was my son. This was the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle. The boy I had proudly watched graduate from college. Now he was a desperate thief tearing apart my sanctuary while he thought I was lying drugged and helpless in the next room. Suddenly, the silence of the office was shattered by the buzzing of his mobile phone. Bradley froze his hand hovering over the bottom drawer. He pulled the phone from his pocket and stared at the screen. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly in the muted light. He swiped the screen to answer and brought the phone to his ear. His voice was a frantic whisper that the hidden microphone picked up with terrifying clarity. "Look, I told you I need until Friday," he hissed, his eyes darting toward the closed door. "You cannot issue a margin call right now. The market is fluctuating. The crypto collapse was unprecedented, and nobody saw it." The voice on the other end was muffled, but Bradley grew more erratic with every passing second. "You know who my father is?" he pleaded, his voice cracking with pure panic. "He has $18 million in liquid assets and properties. I am coming into the money this week. I swear the debt will be paid in full. Just give me 4 more days. 4 days and you will have your $3 million. Please do not liquidate my primary accounts. If you do that, I am completely ruined." He ended the call and let his hand drop to his side, staring blankly at the wall. $3 million. My son had gambled away $3 million on volatile digital currencies, and he was drowning in the consequences. He had leveraged everything he owned, and now the sharks were circling his sinking ship. He let out a ragged sob and turned back toward the heavy steel safe behind my desk. He grabbed a bronze paperweight from my desk and raised it above his head as if he were going to try and bash the electronic keypad to pieces. "Bradley, stop being an idiot." The sharp voice sliced through the room. Monica stepped into the frame of the hidden camera. She was dressed in a white blazer, holding a sleek leather portfolio under her arm. She looked completely out of place, standing amidst the chaos my son had created. She walked over and snatched the paperweight out of his hand, slamming it back onto the desk. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her tone dripping with absolute disgust. "If you break the keypad, the internal locking mechanism will permanently freeze. We will never get inside." Bradley ran his trembling hands through his hair, leaving it sticking up in wild angles. "They are going to take everything, Monica," he cried, his voice echoing in the small room. "The margin call is happening. They want $3 million by the end of the week. If we do not get into this safe right now and find his banking passwords, we are going to lose our house. We are going to lose the cars. I will be facing federal fraud charges for the corporate accounts I borrowed from. I need his money today." Monica rolled her eyes and let out a long, exasperated sigh. "You are so incredibly short-sighted, Bradley," she said, shaking her head. "We do not need to break into a metal box like common criminals." She set her leather portfolio on the edge of the desk and unzipped it. She reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. She tossed them onto the desk right in front of him. "Look at these," she commanded. Bradley leaned in, squinting at the bold black lettering at the top of the pages. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It is the key to the kingdom," Monica replied, a slow, wicked smile spreading across her face. "This is a pre-signed emergency power of attorney document, and beneath it is a certified medical evaluation form from a doctor. I paid him $25,000 in cash to sign it. It officially declares your father entirely unfit to manage his own estate due to severe and rapid cognitive decline. It grants you immediate and total authority over all his financial accounts, his properties, and the $18 million trust." Bradley stared at the papers as if they were made of solid gold. "But Dad has not signed the power of attorney," he whispered, touching the edge of the paper. "And his signature has to be witnessed and notarized." Monica leaned closer to him, her eyes gleaming with dark triumph. "Do not worry about the signature, Bradley. I already took care of that. We just need him to stay completely sedated until Friday morning. We will bring the doctor and a notary into the living room, and they will witness his absolute mental collapse. By noon on Friday, every single dollar he owns will just be sitting right inside your personal bank account." I stared at her, his chest heaving, as the weight of her words slowly settled into his frantic mind. The sheer audacity of the plan seemed to momentarily paralyze him. He reached out and touched the edge of the medical evaluation form, his fingers tracing the forged signature of the corrupt physician. "So that is it," he whispered, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. "We just wait. We just keep feeding him those chocolates until Friday morning, and then it is over." Monica nodded slowly, a cool, calculating expression, completely erasing any trace of the panicked daughter-in-law she had played just 24 hours ago. "Exactly," she said, her tone sharp and commanding. The doctor will arrive precisely at 10 o'clock on Friday morning. I have arranged for a mobile notary to be here at the exact same time. The notary is a close contact of the doctor. He does not ask questions. He just stamps the documents and takes his cash fee. They will walk into the living room and observe your father. They will see him trembling. They will see him babbling incoherently and unable to recognize his own surroundings. The doctor will officially sign off on his total cognitive failure right there on video. You sign the emergency power of attorney, and the trust automatically transfers to your control. I lay perfectly still under my heavy blankets, watching the screen of my tablet. The sheer mechanical efficiency of their plot was breathtaking. They had orchestrated my complete destruction with the casual precision of planning a weekend vacation. My son leaned heavily against my mahogany desk, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead with the back of his trembling hand. "But what if he does not eat the chocolates?" Bradley asked, his anxiety flaring up again. "What if he refuses them today?" "Then we put it in his soup," Monica replied without a single second of hesitation. "We crush them up and we stir them into his tea. We do whatever it takes to keep the haloperidol levels soaring in his bloodstream. We are too close to the finish line to let a little hesitation ruin everything. We have to be strong, Bradley. We are securing our future." Suddenly, the harsh buzzing of Bradley's mobile phone shattered the quiet tension in the office. He flinched violently, nearly dropping the device on the hardwood floor. He glanced at the caller identification screen, and his face instantly turned a sickening shade of gray. "It is them again," he choked out, panic seizing his throat. "The creditors. They are tracking my location. They want to know when the wire transfer is coming through." "Answer it." Monica ordered, her eyes flashing with annoyance. "Tell them whatever they want to hear. Lie to them. Just keep them at bay until Friday noon. Do not let them suspect that you are stalling." Bradley nodded frantically. He turned his back to Monica, walking toward the large bay windows at the far end of the office. He pressed the phone to his ear, his voice immediately adopting a pathetic, begging tone that made my stomach turn. "Listen to me," he pleaded. "I told you the capital is tied up in a family trust. The executor is signing off on the release this week. I just need a few more days. You cannot freeze my accounts. If you freeze them, the transfer will bounce." While my son was distracted, practically weeping into his phone, I kept my eyes firmly fixed on the hidden camera feed. What happened next changed the entire trajectory of my counterattack. As soon as Bradley's back was completely turned, Monica's entire demeanor shifted. The supportive, confident wife vanished. Her eyes darted toward the office door, and then toward her husband, ensuring he was fully engrossed in his desperate phone call. She moved quickly and quietly. She reached into her oversized designer handbag sitting on the edge of my desk. She bypassed the main compartment and unzipped a hidden secondary pocket sewn into the lining. She pulled out a thin manila folder. It was entirely separate from the thick stack of trust documents she had just shown to Bradley. My pulse quickened. Why would she hide a document from her own CO conspirator? Monica opened the folder, laying a single sheet of paper flat against the polished wood of my desk. She swiftly pulled her own smartphone from her pocket, opened the camera application, and snapped a high-resolution photograph of the document. She did not use the flash. She operated with the smooth, practiced efficiency of a seasoned corporate spy. The moment the photo was captured, she slipped the paper back into the folder, shoved it deep into the hidden lining of her bow, and zipped it shut. She smoothed down her white blazer and casually leaned against the desk just as Bradley ended his phone call and turned back around. He was wiping tears from his eyes, completely oblivious to the betrayal that had just occurred mere inches behind his back. "They gave me until Friday at 5:00, he stammered, his voice shaking. "If the $3 million is not wired by then, they are taking the house." Monica walked over and wrapped her arms around him, resting her chin on his shoulder. "It will be wired by 1:00, she whispered soothingly. "I promise you, Bradley, everything is going to be perfect. I watched them embrace on my screen, feeling a deep, chilling realization wash over me. Monica was running a game within the game. She was not just conspiring against me, she was conspiring against my son. She had a secondary plan that Bradley knew absolutely nothing about. A secret document, a hidden folder, a photograph taken in the shadows. She was preparing to double-cross him. The moment the trust money hit his account, she was going to execute her own private exit strategy. I closed the video feed application and opened my encrypted messaging service. I stared at the blank text box for a moment, collecting my thoughts. My son was a greedy, desperate fool, but Monica was a highly sophisticated predator. I needed to know exactly what she was hiding in that designer bag. I typed a message to Victor, my fingers moving swiftly across the digital keyboard. "Victor," I wrote, "we have a massive complication. Monica is hiding separate legal documents from Bradley. She is playing her own angle. I need you to initiate a full covert audit of her luxury art gallery immediately. Do not use your regular accounting firm. Use the independent offshore investigators we keep on retainer. I want every single transaction from the last 12 months pulled and scrutinized. Dig deep into her personal accounts. Find out where her money is actually going. Track down any offshore wire transfers. I need to know exactly who she is secretly working with before Friday morning." I hit send and locked my tablet, sliding it under my heavy blankets. The pieces of the puzzle were shifting, revealing a picture far darker than I had ever anticipated. I lay there in the quiet bedroom, listening to the faint sound of my son and his treacherous wife leaving my home. They thought they had trapped an old man. They had no idea they had just walked straight into the jaws of a wolf. The next 48 hours dragged by with agonizing slowness. I continued to play my part perfectly. I stumbled when I walked. I repeated myself during phone calls with my son. I let my food drop onto my shirt. By Wednesday afternoon, they were completely convinced that my mind was rapidly disintegrating into nothing. At 1 o'clock, a scheduled medical transport van arrived at my house. It was time for my weekly physical therapy appointment to rehabilitate my hip. Bradley actually came over to help me into the van, acting the part of the devoted son for the driver. He buckled my seatbelt and patted my shoulder, telling me to have a good session. As the van pulled away, I watched his reflection in the side mirror. He immediately pulled out his phone, his face twisting back into a mask of frantic anxiety. He was likely calling his creditors again, begging for a few more hours. The driver dropped me off at the main entrance of the rehabilitation clinic in downtown Dallas. I walked slowly through the sliding glass doors, leaning heavily on my cane. But the moment I was out of sight from the street, I straightened my back. I did not go to the physical therapy wing. I bypassed the reception desk entirely and walked straight down the long tiled corridor toward the employee exit. I pushed through the heavy metal fire door and stepped out into the damp, cool air of the underground parking garage beneath the building. The concrete cavern was dimly lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and damp cement. Parked in the farthest corner, completely isolated from the other vehicles, was a black luxury sedan with heavily tinted windows. As I approached, the rear passenger door opened. Victor stepped out. He looked exhausted. Dark circles hung under his eyes, and his suit was wrinkled as if he had not slept in days. Standing next to him was Thomas. Thomas was my lead corporate attorney. He was a ruthless, brilliant legal mind who treated the law like a weapon. He did not smile when he saw me. He just gave a curt, professional nod. We did not waste time with pleasantries. I walked up to the trunk of the car where Victor had rested a thick leather briefcase. He clicked the brass locks open and pulled out a massive stack of financial documents bound tightly together with thick rubber bands. "This is everything," Victor said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty garage. The independent investigators worked around the clock. We pulled the tax returns, the bank statements, and the private ledger from Monica's luxury art gallery. "It is worse than we could have ever imagined, Harrison." I leaned my cane against the bumper of the car and took the heavy dossier from his hands. I flipped open the thick cardboard cover. "Tell me," I commanded, my eyes scanning the dense rows of numbers printed on the top page. Victor pointed to a column of highlighted transactions. "Her gallery is not actually selling art," he explained, his tone grim and absolute. "At least not to legitimate buyers. Over the last 12 months, she has recorded over $6 million in sales. But the buyers are all anonymous shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada. They are purchasing worthless amateur paintings for hundreds of thousands of dollars apiece. She is running a highly sophisticated money laundering operation right out in the open. She cleans dirty cash, takes a massive percentage as her commission, and then funnels the clean money out through her corporate payroll accounts." I stared at the numbers, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. She was not just a greedy daughter. She was a hardened criminal operating a federal financial crime syndicate. If the authorities raided her gallery, she would be facing decades in a federal penitentiary. That explains why she is so desperate to get her hands on the $18 million trust, I said, my voice low and steady. "If she assumes control of my estate, she can use my legitimate commercial properties to wash even larger sums of illicit money. She would turn my entire life work into a criminal enterprise." Thomas stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. He looked directly into my eyes, his expression completely devoid of any emotion. "That is only the beginning, Harrison," he said, his voice cutting through the damp air like a razor. "Turn to the very last page of the dossier. The gallery is just her side business. What she did to you directly is far worse." I flipped past dozens of pages of wire transfers and fake invoices until I reached a thick legal document at the back of the stack. It was a commercial loan agreement printed on the official letterhead of a major national bank. I read the details and felt the breath leave my lungs. 6 months ago, someone had successfully taken out a massive mortgage using my primary commercial plaza as collateral. The loan was for exactly $4 million. I looked at the final page. There, resting right on the dotted line, was my signature. It was a perfect forgery. Someone had legally bound my property to a massive debt without my knowledge. "Oh, where did the money go?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Victor swallowed hard. "It did not go into your accounts, Harrison. The exact moment the bank approved the $4 million loan, the entire sum was wired out of the country. It was transferred to an encrypted offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. The account is completely untraceable, but we know Monica authorized the transfer from her gallery computer." I stood in the dark garage holding the forged paper. The pieces of her secret plan suddenly aligned. Monica was never going to save Bradley. She was going to let him take the fall while she vanished with absolutely all the stolen money. I stared at the forged signature on the mortgage document, feeling the damp chill of the underground garage seeping into my bones. $4 million was an astronomical sum to steal, but the method was what truly terrified me. It was clean, fast, and entirely untraceable once it crossed international borders. I looked up from the paper and met Thomas's unwavering gaze. "Who owns the account in the Cayman Islands?" I asked, my voice echoing flatly against the concrete pillars. "I need a name right now." Thomas did not say a single word. He simply reached into the back seat of his luxury sedan and pulled out a sleek silver laptop. He rested it on the trunk next to the leather briefcase and opened the screen. The harsh blue light illuminated his sharp features as his fingers flew across the keyboard. He bypassed several encrypted security gateways before pulling up a dossier compiled by our private investigators. He turned the screen toward me. "Look at the photograph," Thomas instructed, his tone clinical and detached. I leaned closer, leaning my weight heavily onto my cane. Staring back at me from the high-resolution display was a young man with styled dark hair and a confident, arrogant smirk. He looked to be in his late 20s, wearing a tailored linen suit that screamed of new money and misplaced confidence. "His name is Julian," Thomas explained, pointing to the detailed biographical data listed below the photograph. "He is 28 years old. He calls himself an independent contemporary art broker, but his professional resume is entirely fabricated. He has no legitimate gallery representation and no documented sales history in the fine art world prior to meeting your daughter-in-law. He is essentially a very expensive amateur. Victor stepped closer to the laptop, shaking his head in absolute disgust. He is not just an amateur broker, Harrison. He is Monica's secret lover. The private investigators have been tracking his movements for the past 72 hours. They uncovered a secondary luxury apartment leased entirely under a corporate shell company, but paid for directly by Monica's private accounts. They have been meeting there discreetly for over a year. Thomas clicked a button on the keyboard, bringing up a series of surveillance photographs. There was Monica looking radiant and perfectly groomed, walking arm in arm with this young man outside an upscale restaurant. There they were sitting together in the VIP lounge of a private airport terminal. She was smiling at him with a genuine, unrestrained passion that I had never once seen her direct toward my son. The pieces of her master plan suddenly locked together with devastating precision. Monica was never trying to save Bradley from his massive hedge fund debts. She did not care about his margin calls or his impending financial ruin. Bradley was nothing more than a convenient idiot. He was the necessary biological key she needed to unlock the $18 million family trust. Once the corrupt doctor declared me mentally incompetent on Friday morning, and Bradley signed that emergency power of attorney, the money would flow instantly into his accounts. But it would not stay there. It would, as his legal wife Monica had full access to all his joint finances. I realized with sickening clarity what she was planning to do the moment the trust funds cleared. "She is going to take it all," I whispered, staring blankly at the photographs on the glowing screen. The $4 million from the forged mortgage was just the down payment on her new life. It was the seed money to set up her international accounts and prepare the escape route. Once the $18 million drops on Friday, she will funnel every single dollar into that Cayman Islands account. She is going to completely drain Bradley dry. And then she is going to get on a private jet with her 28-year-old boyfriend and disappear into a country that does not have an extradition treaty with the United States. She will leave my son completely bankrupt, facing $3 million in corporate debt and likely federal charges for elder abuse. Thomas nodded slowly, closing the laptop with a sharp snap. "That is exactly what she's going to do, Harrison. She has engineered the perfect exit strategy. She is using your son's desperate greed to facilitate the theft of your entire estate. Bradley is digging his own grave, and he is eagerly handing her the shovel. He thinks they are a team fighting to save their lifestyle, but she is just waiting for the check to clear before she cuts the cord." I stood in the silence of the parking garage, my mind racing through the implications of this monumental betrayal. My son was a fool. He was weak, arrogant, and selfish. He was perfectly willing to drug his own father and lock him away in a psychiatric ward just to save his own skin. But was he truly complicit in the theft of the $4 million? Did he know about the forged commercial mortgage? Did he know that his wife was already siphoning millions out of the country while he wept on the phone with his angry creditors? If Bradley knew about the forged mortgage, then he was fully aware of the money laundering and the impending escape. It would mean he was willingly playing a part in a much larger federal crime, hoping to take a share of the stolen cash. But if he did not know about the $4 million, then he was walking blindly into a slaughterhouse. He believed he was simply securing his inheritance early. He had absolutely no idea that the woman he loved was about to leave him entirely destitute and legally responsible for a massive financial fraud. I needed to know the truth before I finalized my counterattack. Tonight, I am going to listen to the rats whispering in the dark. And when I find out, I will burn their world. I rode the medical transport van back to my house, operating under the heavy weight of the truths I had just uncovered. The driver helped me up the front steps, and I gave him a weak, grateful nod, playing the part of the frail old man right up to the moment my heavy front door clicked shut. Once inside the quiet house, I dropped the act completely. I walked with a steady, firm pace down the hallway to my bedroom. The afternoon bled into the evening, and the silence of the house felt different now. It was no longer just empty. It was crawling with the invisible ghosts of my family and their betrayal. I changed into my pajamas, got into bed, and pulled my tablet from beneath the mattress. I adjusted the brightness and opened the hidden camera feeds. For hours, there was nothing but the steady hum of the air purifier and the shifting shadows of the setting sun moving across the floorboards. Then, at exactly 10:15, the front door handle turned. Bradley and Monica stepped into the dimly lit living room. They did not look like the confident masterminds they had been yesterday. They looked ragged and tense. Bradley immediately walked over to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a large glass of scotch. He drank half of it in one swallow, his hands shaking so badly that the crystal glass clinked loudly against his teeth. Monica dropped her designer bag onto the sofa and crossed her arms, glaring at him. "You need to pace yourself, Bradley," she hissed, her voice tight with anxiety. "We are too close to the finish line for you to lose your nerve now. The medication is working perfectly. Your father is practically a vegetable at this point. Friday is only 2 days away. Just hold yourself together." Bradley slammed his glass down onto the wooden cabinet. The loud, sharp crack echoed through the room. "Do not talk to me about losing my nerve, Monica." He snapped, his voice a harsh, raspy whisper. "Do not stand there acting like you are the one holding this entire family together. I know exactly what you did." Monica froze. The arrogant posture she constantly maintained suddenly vanished. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave. Bradley took a step toward her, his face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. "I am talking about the commercial plaza, Monica. I am talking about the $4 million loan you took out in his name 6 months ago." The words hit the silent room like a physical blow. On my tablet screen, I saw Monica take a physical step backward. Her eyes widened in genuine shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but Bradley cut her off aggressively, pointing a finger directly at her face. "Do not even try to lie to me," he snarled, stepping closer. "I found out a week ago. The bank sent a routine audit notice to the wrong email address. It went to my old corporate account instead of the dummy account you set up. I saw the loan origination documents, Monica. I saw my father's signature. I know he did not sign that paper because he was in the hospital having his hip evaluated that entire week. You forged his signature. You committed massive federal bank fraud behind my back." Monica stared at him, her chest heaving rapidly. She looked like a trapped rat calculating her escape routes. "And what did you do with that information?" "Bradley," she asked, her voice turning venomous. "You clearly did not go to the police. You did not tell your precious father. So why are you bringing it up now? Why are you suddenly acting like you have the moral high ground?" Bradley let out a dark, bitter laugh that sent a chill straight down my spine. "Moral high ground," he mocked, shaking his head. "There is no moral high ground left for either of us, Monica. You think I did not turn you in because I love you. I did not turn you in because we are legally married. If the federal investigators find out you forged his name on a $4 million commercial mortgage, they will drag me right down with you. They will look at my failing hedge fund accounts. They will look at my $3 million in margin debt. They will assume I was your co-conspirator from the very beginning. I would go to federal prison for the rest of my life because of your insane greed." I watched my son pour himself another drink, his hands steadying as his anger solidified into pure, ruthless logic. "That is why I agreed to this whole sickening plot with the chocolates." Bradley continued, his voice deadly calm. "That is why I am letting you poison my own father. If the feds find out you forged his name, I have to go down with you. We get the $18 million on Friday morning. We pay off the $4 million loan immediately to cover your tracks, and we pay off my margin debt. We wipe the slate completely clean, and no one ever knows what we did." I sat in the dark bedroom, my tablet glowing brightly in my hands. The final shred of hope I had harbored for my son withered and died in that exact moment. Bradley was not a victim of his wife's manipulation. He was not blindly walking into her trap, unaware of her crimes. He was a willing, eager participant. He knew she had stolen $4 million from me, and his solution was to help her steal $14 million more just to save his own skin. My son was completely, entirely irredeemable. He had chosen his path of destruction. Now I would ensure he walked it straight to the very bitter end. The morning sun crept through the blinds, but it brought no warmth to my bedroom. I lay there for a few moments, staring at the ceiling. The heavy, crushing weight of heartbreak that had suffocated me the night before was completely gone. In its place was something else entirely. It was a cold, calculating ice that filled every vein in my body. For the past week, I had allowed myself to feel the pain of a father losing his son to greed. I had played the victim in my own mind, mourning the family I thought I had built. But watching Bradley willingly conspire to poison me and cover up a massive federal crime extinguished the last flickering ember of parental grace. I sat up in bed and threw the heavy comforter aside. My joints ached, but I did not reach for my cane. I did not need it. The time for playing the helpless, confused old man in the privacy of my own home was over. I walked to my bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. Staring back at me was the man who had crushed ruthless competitors in corporate boardrooms and navigated treacherous negotiations for 40 years. I walked back into my bedroom, picked up my secure phone, and dialed Thomas. He answered on the first ring. "Get the federal authorities involved." I told him, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "I want the Financial Crimes Division. Bring them up to speed on the forged commercial mortgage, the money laundering operations at the gallery, and the offshore wire transfers to the Cayman Islands." Thomas let out a slow breath on the other end of the line. "I have a contact at the Bureau," he said. "A senior special agent who specializes in corporate fraud and elder abuse. I will arrange a secure meeting this afternoon." At 2:00, I slipped out of the house using the same medical transport ruse. This time, the van dropped me off at an inconspicuous gray office building on the outskirts of the city. Thomas was waiting for me in a sterile, windowless conference room on the 4th floor. Sitting across from him was a man with sharp, perceptive eyes and a neatly trimmed military haircut. "This is Special Agent Miller," Thomas said as I entered the room. I took a seat at the heavy metal table and slid my tablet across the surface. I showed him the toxicology report from the poisoned chocolates, the forged bank documents, and the hidden camera footage of Monica and Bradley plotting in my living room. Agent Miller watched the videos in absolute silence. When the footage finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "This is a textbook case of aggravated elder abuse combined with massive federal wire fraud," Miller said, his voice gravelly and professional. "We have enough evidence right now to secure warrants for both of them. We can send a tactical team to raid their house and the art gallery by midnight tonight. We will confiscate their electronics, freeze their domestic accounts, and arrest them before the sun comes up." "No," I said, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "You will not raid their house tonight." Agent Miller frowned, leaning forward. "Mr. Harrison, I understand this is your family, but my job is to stop a crime in progress. Your daughter-in-law is actively poisoning you and preparing to flee the jurisdiction. If we do not move immediately, she might catch wind of the investigation and disappear." "She will not disappear," I countered, meeting his intense gaze without blinking. "She is waiting for the $18 million trust transfer on Friday morning. That is her golden goose. If you raid them tonight, their defense attorneys will spin a web of lies. They will claim the chocolates were a mistake. They will claim the forged mortgage was a misunderstanding or a desperate business move. They will tie you up in court for years, and my son might actually manage to secure a plea deal that keeps him out of prison. I do not want them arrested for planning a crime. I want them caught in the absolute undeniable act of executing it. I want them to attempt the fraudulent transfer in front of federal witnesses." Agent Miller looked at Thomas and then back at me. A slow, understanding smile touched the corners of his mouth. "You want to set a bear trap," he said softly. "I want to set a trap they cannot possibly chew their way out of," I replied. "Monica said she hired a corrupt doctor and a mobile notary to witness my mental collapse and sign the emergency power of attorney. Can you intercept the notary before he arrives at my house?" "We can do better than intercept him," Miller said, pulling a notepad from his jacket pocket. "We can detain him on separate charges early Friday morning. And since Monica is expecting a quiet, unassuming man to show up and stamp her fake documents, I can personally take his place. I will be inside your living room wearing a wire when they try to steal your entire estate." The logistics were finalized completely over the next hour. The FBI tactical team would wait silently down my street. Agent Miller would enter my home disguised as the notary. I returned to my house as the sun finally set. Thursday night descended over the quiet neighborhood. The large house was completely silent. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed the beautiful artisan box of chocolates Monica had given me. I carried the box to the sink and turned on the garbage disposal. The loud grinding noise filled the room as I dropped the laced chocolates down the drain, one by one watching the toxic poison wash away. I rinsed the sink out thoroughly. I prepared my suit for the morning. The execution is set. Friday morning arrived with a heavy overcast sky that perfectly matched the grim theatrical performance about to take place inside my home. I woke up early, but I did not put on the tailored suit I had prepared the night before. A man who was supposedly losing his mind to chemical dementia would not dress sharply for a legal meeting. Instead, I wore an oversized flannel pajama shirt and a pair of loose gray sweatpants. I retrieved a medical wheelchair from the garage. It was left over from my initial hip surgery recovery. I positioned it directly in the center of the living room, facing the large bay windows, but angled slightly, so the hidden camera in the smoke detector had a perfect view of the entire scene. I sat down heavily in the chair and let my posture completely collapse. I rounded my shoulders, let my head loll slightly to the left, and allowed a thin string of saliva to pool at the corner of my mouth. I fixed my gaze on a blank spot on the far wall. It was a masterclass in silent acting born from a cold and unforgiving rage. At exactly 45 minutes past 9, the heavy brass handle of the front door clicked and turned. The house was dead quiet except for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Bradley walked in first. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, looking every bit the concerned and grieving son. Close behind him was Monica, holding her sleek leather portfolio. She radiated a tense, nervous energy. Following them were two men I had never seen before. The first was a tall, thin man carrying a worn black medical bag. He had slicked back hair and wore a cheap suit under a wrinkled white lab coat. He exuded the distinct oily aura of a man who sold his medical ethics to the highest bidder. The second man walked in quietly. He wore a simple beige windbreaker and carried a small leather satchel. He kept his head down and his expression entirely neutral. Monica introduced him casually as the state notary, but I knew exactly who he was. It was Special Agent Miller from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He did not make eye contact with me. He just took a quiet position in the corner, observing everything with sharp, trained eyes. Monica walked briskly into the living room and stopped a few feet from my wheelchair. She looked down at me, her eyes scanning my disheveled appearance, my slack jaw, and my vacant stare. A flicker of profound relief washed over her face. She turned to Bradley and gave him a single sharp nod. "He is completely out of it," she whispered, her voice barely carrying across the room. The dosage peaked perfectly. Bradley swallowed hard and walked over to my side. He pulled a wooden dining chair over and sat down right next to me. He reached out and placed his trembling hand over mine. His palm was cold and damp with sweat. He looked at the camera Monica was setting up on a tripod near the fireplace. The red recording light blinked on. Bradley took a deep breath and immediately forced a look of absolute devastation onto his face. The tears welled up in his eyes with a practiced ease. "Dad." "It is me, Bradley," he said, his voice cracking with artificial sorrow. "It is your son. We are here to help you, Dad. You have not been well lately. You are not yourself anymore. You have been so confused, and we just want to make sure you are safe and protected. It is for your own good, Dad. I promise you this is all for your own good." I did not blink. I did not acknowledge his presence. I simply continued to stare at the blank wall, letting a small tremor shake my left hand. Deep inside, I felt a burning desire to slap the fake tears right off his treacherous face, but I maintained my absolute discipline. The trap needed to be fully sprung. Monica motioned for the corrupt doctor to step forward. He walked over and stood directly in front of the camera, ensuring his face and his medical badge were clearly visible for the recording. "My name is Dr. Aris Thorne," he announced, using a smooth, practiced tone that sounded like he was reading from a script. "I am an independent medical examiner retained by the family to assess the cognitive and neurological status of Mr. Harrison. The patient has been exhibiting severe signs of rapid-onset dementia and profound mental instability. I am here to conduct a formal evaluation to determine his legal capacity to manage his personal and financial affairs." Dr. Thorne reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small metallic penlight. He clicked it on and stepped closer to my wheelchair. He leaned down, bringing his face uncomfortably close to mine. I could smell the stale coffee and cheap mints on his breath. "Mr. Harrison," he said loudly, snapping his fingers right next to my ear. "Can you hear me, sir? Can you tell me your name? Can you tell me what day of the week it is?" I gave him absolutely nothing. I let my eyes drift slowly past him, focusing on the gray clouds outside the window. He shined the bright beam of the penlight directly into my left eye, and then my right. I kept my pupils as steady as possible, resisting the natural urge to flinch away from the harsh glare. He turned back to the camera, shaking his head. "The patient is unresponsive to verbal commands and visual stimuli," he declared. "He is exhibiting severe motor dysfunction consistent with advanced neurological decay." He walked over to the coffee table and signed the medical form. "As a licensed professional, I officially declare him incapacitated," he stated. Monica smiled a cold, victorious smile, holding the legal power of attorney. Monica stepped away from the camera and moved toward my wheelchair. She carried the thick stack of legal documents with the reverence someone else might reserve for a holy relic. I could hear the sharp, confident click of her expensive heels against the hardwood floor. The sound echoed in the quiet living room like the ticking of a countdown clock. She stopped directly in front of me, blocking my view of the gray sky outside the window. She looked down at me with an expression of profound pity that was entirely fabricated. She reached out and gently laid the heavy stack of papers directly onto my lap. I could see the bold black lettering at the top of the first page. It was the absolute, irrevocable transfer of the $18 million trust. Beneath it was the emergency power of attorney that would hand my entire life over to my treacherous son. She reached into the pocket of her pristine white blazer and pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen. She leaned down and took my right hand. I made sure to let my fingers tremble violently as she touched me. I let my hand feel as limp and useless as dead wood. She pried my fingers open and aggressively pushed the cold metal barrel of the pen into my palm. She wrapped my weak fingers around it and squeezed my hand tightly to ensure I did not drop it. "Just sign right here, Dad," she whispered, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It is just a routine medical form. The doctor needs your signature so we can get you the proper care and the new medication you so desperately need. It will only take a second, and then you can go right back to sleep." Bradley leaned in closer from his chair, resting his hand on my shoulder. "Come on, Dad," he coaxed, his voice trembling with fake emotion. Do it for me. Do it so we can finally get you the help you deserve. I know it is hard to concentrate, but we are right here with you. We are not going anywhere." I stared down at the documents resting heavily on my thighs. I felt the smooth, cool gold of the fountain pen resting against my skin. The room was absolutely silent. The corrupt doctor stood near the fireplace, shifting his weight impatiently from one foot to the other. The quiet man in the beige windbreaker, who was actually Special Agent Miller, watched me with an intense, focused gaze. He was waiting for my signal. This was the exact moment they thought they had won. This was the summit of their grand conspiracy. They believed they had successfully drugged an old man and stolen an empire right out from under him. I took a slow, deep breath, pulling the cool morning air deep into my lungs, and then I stopped acting. The violent trembling in my right hand ceased instantly. The erratic jerking of my fingers vanished, leaving my grip on the gold fountain pen absolute and firm. I slowly closed my jaw, pulling my mouth into a tight, severe line. I reached up with my left hand and calmly wiped the thin trail of saliva from my chin using the cuff of my flannel shirt. I rolled my shoulders back and straightened my spine, pushing myself up from the slumped, defeated posture I had maintained all morning. I sat perfectly upright in the medical wheelchair. The transformation was immediate and total. The helpless, decaying old man evaporated into the silent air, leaving behind a cold, calculating patriarch who had just trapped 2 rats in a steel cage. I slowly raised my head. I let my gaze travel up the crisp white fabric of Monica's blazer until my eyes locked directly onto hers. I did not give her the blank, confused stare of a dementia patient. I gave her the razor-sharp, piercing glare of a man who knew every single one of her dark, pathetic secrets. The smug, victorious smile on her face fractured instantly. Her eyes widened, and a sudden, terrifying realization dawned in her dark pupils. She took a tiny, involuntary step backward, her breath catching sharply in her throat. Bradley felt the sudden rigidity in my shoulder and slowly pulled his hand away as if he had just touched a burning stove. He looked at my face, and the fake tears pooled in his eyes suddenly stopped falling. The room felt as though all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of it. I held the gold fountain pen up between my fingers, inspecting it casually. "You know, Monica," I said, my voice booming through the quiet living room with perfect, unmistakable clarity. "The CBD in those chocolates was a bit stale, so I switched to Victor's cookies." The silence that followed my words was completely deafening. It was not a peaceful quiet. It was the violent, explosive silence of a bomb detonating in slow motion. Monica stood completely frozen, her face drained of all color, turning as pale as the legal documents resting on my lap. Her jaw dropped slightly, but no words came out. She looked as though she had just been struck by a bolt of lightning. Bradley stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. The corrupt doctor took a sudden, panicked step backward, bumping into the fireplace mantel. Only Special Agent Miller remained perfectly still, his hand sliding casually toward the inside pocket of his windbreaker. The bear trap had just snapped shut, and its iron teeth were buried deep into their bones. I looked directly from my son to the woman who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. They had severely underestimated the man who built their comfortable lives from nothing with his own hands. The hidden camera continued to silently record every single moment of their absolute undoing. There was no escape. There was absolutely no going back. The game was entirely over. I watched the color drain from Monica's face, leaving her skin looking like cracked porcelain. She opened her mouth, but only a stammer emerged. She took another step backward, her heels scraping against the hardwood. Her hands began to shake violently. She dropped the heavy gold fountain pen. It hit the floor with a sharp clatter that echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. Beside her, my son remained paralyzed. Bradley was anchored to his wooden chair, his eyes wide and unblinking, his jaw hanging slack. He looked at me as if a ghost had ripped out of the floorboards. The suffocating tension in the room caused the temperature to plummet. It was the icy chill of absolute exposure. They had stripped away their own humanity to steal my wealth, and now they were left standing completely naked in the harsh, unforgiving light of the truth. The sudden sound of a zipper closing broke the heavy silence. Dr. Thorne, the corrupt medical examiner, who had just officially declared me a vegetative invalid, was suddenly moving with frantic, desperate speed. He swept his penlight and his stethoscope into his worn black medical bag, not even bothering to organize them. He did not look at Monica. He did not look at Bradley. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the floor, his oily demeanor replaced by the panic of a rat trying to flee a sinking ship. He grabbed the handle of his bag and practically sprinted toward the arched entryway that led to the front foyer. I did not raise my voice to stop him. I did not even turn my head to watch him run. I simply waited for the inevitable collision. As the doctor reached the threshold, a tall, imposing figure stepped smoothly out from the shadows of the hallway, completely blocking the exit. It was Thomas, my lead corporate attorney. He stood there in his immaculate tailored suit, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression carved from solid granite. Dr. Thorne slammed to a halt, his cheap shoes sliding on the rug. "Going somewhere?" Dr. Thomas asked, his voice low and dripping with lethal menace. "The medical board is going to be incredibly interested in the diagnosis you just made on camera. I strongly suggest you sit down and remain silent." The doctor swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He slowly backed away from the hallway, retreating until his legs hit the edge of the sofa. He sank into the cushions, clutching his bag to his chest like a shield. Monica looked frantically from Thomas to the quiet man in the windbreaker who still stood silently in the corner. Her mind was racing, desperately, trying to calculate an escape route from a maze that had no exits. She turned her panicked gaze back to me. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling so badly it was barely audible. "I do not understand. What are you talking about? What cookies?" I ignored her entirely. I placed my hands on the padded armrests of the medical wheelchair. I pushed down, pressing my weight into my legs, and stood up. I did not use my cane. I did not hesitate or wobble. I stood tall and firm, my posture straight, my shoulders broad. The physical transformation was the final, devastating blow to their fragile reality. Bradley gasped aloud, gripping the edge of the dining chair so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. He had spent the last 3 months watching me hobble around the house, leaning heavily on a metal stick. He had convinced himself that I was weak, fragile, and easily broken. Watching me stand before him radiating strength and absolute authority shattered the very foundation of his pathetic arrogance. I stepped away from the wheelchair, leaving the thick stack of fraudulent transfer documents resting uselessly on the seat. I walked with slow, measured steps toward the center of the living room, stopping directly in front of the heavy glass coffee table. I reached into the oversized pocket of my flannel pajama shirt and pulled out a thick, folded stack of paper. It was the official laboratory analysis I had received from Victor. I raised the document high in the air, letting the silence stretch out for a few agonizing seconds. Then I slammed it down onto the glass table with a thunderous crack that made both Monica and Bradley flinch violently. The crisp white pages slid across the smooth surface, coming to a stop directly under my son's trembling hands. "That is a certified toxicology report from the Federal Bureau of Investigation," I declared, my voice ringing with cold, absolute authority. "It details the massive lethal dose of haloperidol you and your wonderful wife baked into those artisan chocolates, a highly regulated antipsychotic drug designed to induce the exact symptoms of severe cognitive decline you so desperately wanted to document today. Attempted chemical endangerment of a senior citizen. That's strike one." Bradley stared at the FBI emblem printed at the top of the page, his eyes darting frantically from the paper to my face. The reality of the situation finally crashed into his mind, bringing with it the terrifying specter of a federal prison cell. He immediately reverted to the only defense mechanism he had left. He tried to play the innocent victim. "Dad," he stammered, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Dad, you have to listen to me. I swear to you I had absolutely no idea. I did not know what was in that box. Monica bought them. She told me they were herbal supplements. I would never do something like this to you. You are my father. You have to believe me." I took a single slow step closer to him, looking right down into his desperate, lying eyes. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I felt nothing but a cold, purifying rage. I raised my hand and pointed a single finger directly at his face, cutting him off completely. "Save your breath, Bradley," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air of the living room like a sharpened blade. "Do not insult my intelligence by pretending you are a victim in this house. You lost the right to call me your father the moment you decided my life was an acceptable price to pay for your miserable debts." I turned my attention away from my pathetic son and gestured to Thomas. My attorney stepped forward with the smooth, calculated grace of an executioner. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and pulled a thick manila folder from his inner pocket. He handed it to me without breaking his cold stare at the two criminals standing in my home. I took the folder and tossed it onto the glass coffee table right next to the toxicology report. The heavy paper slid across the smooth surface and stopped inches from Monica's trembling hands. "Open it," I commanded, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. Neither of them moved. They were frozen in a state of absolute terror, staring at the innocuous manila folder as if it were a ticking bomb. When they refused to touch it, I leaned forward and flipped the cover open myself. Staring up at them were the official bank statements and the finalized commercial loan origination documents. 6 months ago, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, rhythmic cadence. Someone successfully secured a $4 million mortgage against my primary commercial plaza. They bypassed all my personal security protocols and submitted a pristine forgery of my signature. And the very moment the bank approved the massive loan, every single cent was wired to an encrypted offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Bradley stared at the documents. He immediately launched into the second act of his pathetic theatrical performance. He grabbed the papers, his hands shaking violently, and turned his body toward his wife. He twisted his face into a mask of pure, outraged shock. "Monica. What is this?" he screamed, his voice cracking with artificial hysteria. "What did you do? Did you steal $4 million from my father? How could you possibly do something like this behind my back? I trusted you. We trusted you." He was trying to throw her directly under the bus, hoping that his loud, desperate display of feigned ignorance would somehow save him from the wrath he knew was coming. Monica stared at her husband with an expression of absolute, profound disgust. She could not even form the words to defend herself, because she knew exactly what he was doing. She knew he was a coward trying to sacrifice her to save his own skin. I stood there watching my son thrash around in the waters of his own deceit. His performance was sickening. It was an insult to every moral lesson I had ever tried to teach him. "Enough," I said, the single word echoing loudly off the high ceiling. I walked back over to the medical wheelchair and reached beneath the folded blanket resting on the seat. I pulled out my digital tablet, the screen already glowing in the dim light of the room. "You are a terrible liar, Bradley," I told him, my voice steady and completely devoid of warmth. "You always have been. Even when you were a little boy trying to hide a broken vase, I could always see the guilt bleeding through your eyes. But this is not a broken vase. This is a federal crime, and you are standing knee-deep in the evidence." I tapped the screen of the tablet, opening the secure application that stored the hidden camera footage. I maximized the audio volume setting and pressed play. The high-definition speakers of the device immediately filled the silent living room with the crisp, unmistakable sound of their own whispered voices from 2 nights ago. "I am talking about the $4 million loan you took out in his name 6 months ago," Bradley's recorded voice hissed, echoing terribly in the present moment. "Do not even try to lie to me. I found out a week ago. Bradley physically recoiled as if the tablet had suddenly caught fire. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow shell of a man. But the recording was not finished. I let it continue to play, allowing the full, devastating weight of his complicity to crash down upon him. If the feds find out you forged his name, I go down with you. The recorded version of my son argued, his voice dripping with greedy desperation. We get the $18 million on Friday morning. We pay off the $4 million loan immediately to cover your tracks, and we pay off my margin debt. We wipe the slate completely clean, and no one ever knows what we did. I reached out and pressed the pause button. The sudden silence that followed was suffocating. The audio recording had just systematically dismantled Bradley's entire defense. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he had known about the massive federal fraud for a week, and instead of reporting it, he had actively conspired to drug his own father to cover it up and profit from the theft. Bradley collapsed backward into the dining chair. His legs simply gave out beneath him. He buried his face in his trembling hands, letting out a long, pathetic whimper that sounded like a dying animal. He knew it was completely over. He knew he was finally going to federal prison for a very long time. But Monica was definitely not a coward. She was a cornered predator, and predators do not surrender. Her shock rapidly mutated into a blind, vicious rage. "You cannot use that audio recording," she screamed wildly. "You cannot prove I forged the signature. And this notary will testify you are insane." She pointed her trembling finger directly at the quiet man. "He will tell the judge you have lost your mind." I looked at the quiet man in the beige windbreaker, sitting inconspicuously in the corner of my living room. Monica was still screaming, her voice echoing off the high ceilings like a trapped bird. She was practically vibrating with a toxic mixture of fear and pure venom. She pointed her manicured finger at the man again, stepping toward him, as if she could command reality to bend to her will. "Tell him," she shrieked, her face turning a blotchy shade of crimson. "Tell my father-in-law that you witnessed his severe cognitive failure. You saw him drooling. You saw him staring blankly at the wall. You are a state-appointed official, and your sworn testimony will hold up in any court in this country. Tell him that if he tries to take this recording to the police, you will swear under oath that he fabricated the entire thing in a fit of dementia." The man in the windbreaker did not flinch. He did not look intimidated by her screaming, and he certainly did not look like a man who was about to perjure himself for a few $1,000s. He simply closed the small leather satchel resting on his lap. He set it gently on the floor beside his chair. The room fell into a strange, suspended silence as everyone watched him. He placed his hands on his knees and stood up. His movements were slow, deliberate, and completely devoid of nervous energy. Monica let out a breathless laugh, turning back to look at me. "You see," she mocked, her voice dripping with absolute malice. "You cannot win this, Harrison. You are an old man playing a game you do not understand. He is going to stamp those documents right now." The quiet man reached his right hand inside the breast pocket of his beige jacket. Monica watched his hand, expecting him to pull out the heavy rubber ink stamp. Instead, he pulled out a dark leather wallet. He flipped it open with a sharp flick of his wrist, holding it high for everyone to see. The morning light caught the gleaming surface of a solid gold shield. "My name is Special Agent Miller," he said, his voice projecting with deep, booming authority. "I am with the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I am afraid I left my notary stamp back at the field office." The arrogant, triumphant sneer vanished from Monica's face instantly. She staggered backward, her heels catching on the rug, causing her to stumble. Bradley let out a strangled gasp, pulling his legs up onto his chair, pressing his back against the dining table. Agent Miller took a few measured steps forward, closing the distance. "You have a fundamental misunderstanding of how digital forensics work, Mom." He continued, his tone conversational yet lethal. "You believed that routing a mortgage through a dummy corporation would mask your identity. You believed that wiring those stolen funds to an encrypted account in the Cayman Islands would make the money untraceable. Monica shook her head wildly, her blonde hair flying around her face. "I do not know what you are talking about," she stammered, her voice reduced to a high-pitched squeak. "I never sent money to the Cayman Islands. You cannot prove anything." Agent Miller offered a cold, humorless smile. "Actually, Mom, we have an overwhelming amount of proof," he corrected her. "While you were busy trying to drug your father-in-law this morning, my colleagues executed a federal search warrant at your luxury art gallery. They seized your personal computers, your servers, and your private ledger. We already pulled the Internet Protocol logs from your main office terminal. We have the exact timestamps proving that the wire transfer to the offshore account originated directly from your personal gallery computer. We also have security footage of you entering the building just minutes before the transfer was initiated. We know about your secret apartment. We know about your 28-year-old amateur art broker boyfriend. We know absolutely everything." The crushing weight of the federal investigation finally broke her. The walls of her meticulously constructed criminal empire collapsed all at once, burying her underneath the rubble. She looked around the room with wild, panicked eyes. She saw Thomas blocking the arched hallway. She saw me standing tall and unyielding near the coffee table. She saw her husband cowering in his chair, completely useless to her. And she saw the federal agent stepping closer, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The fight or flight instinct is a powerful biological mechanism. In that split second, Monica realized that her life of luxury, her stolen millions, and her freedom were entirely gone. She chose flight. With a sudden feral scream, she lunged forward. She did not aim for the hallway where Thomas stood. She aimed straight for the heavy glass bay windows, hoping to somehow smash through them and escape into the front yard. She never even made it past the sofa. Agent Miller moved with terrifying explosive speed. He closed the gap in a fraction of a second, lunging forward and wrapping his strong arms around her waist. His momentum carried them both down. They crashed onto the hardwood floor with a heavy, sickening thud that shook the furniture. Monica thrashed wildly, kicking her expensive heels and scratching at his arms like a trapped feral cat. "Let me go!" she shrieked, her voice tearing at her vocal cords. "Get your hands off of me! You cannot do this!" Agent Miller easily overpowered her, pinning her shoulders flat against the floorboards. He grabbed her right wrist, twisting it firmly behind her back. The sharp, metallic click of the steel handcuff ratcheting closed echoed sharply in the room. He grabbed her left arm and secured it, pulling the chain tight. Monica buried her face against the polished wood, weeping hysterically as the reality of her total destruction finally settled over her broken life. I stood perfectly still and watched the woman who had tormented my family for years writhe against the polished hardwood floor. Her expensive white blazer was stained and crumpled beneath the heavy knee of the federal agent. The sharp metallic clicking of the handcuffs seemed to echo endlessly in the vast living room. It was the sound of absolute finality. With Monica fully restrained, Agent Miller pulled her roughly to her feet. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She refused to look at me. Her eyes were fixed firmly on the floor, completely broken by the sudden and violent destruction of her grand criminal design. But the performance was not entirely over. As the reality of his wife's arrest finally penetrated his thick skull, Bradley snapped out of his paralyzed trance. He looked at the federal agent, and then he looked at me. The sheer, unadulterated terror in his eyes was almost pathetic to witness. He realized that the FBI did not just come for the woman who forged the mortgage. They came for the accomplices, too. His legs gave out completely. He slid off the edge of the dining chair and collapsed onto the hardwood floor. He crawled toward me, the expensive fabric of his tailored charcoal suit dragging across the rug. He reached out with trembling hands and wrapped his arms tightly around my legs. He buried his face against my knees, weeping with a loud, hysterical desperation that filled the room. "Dad, please," he begged, his voice cracking and pitching upward into a pathetic whine. "You have to stop them. You cannot let them take me away." She made me do it, Dad. Monica orchestrated the entire thing. She bought the poisoned chocolates and she forged the banking documents. I had absolutely nothing to do with the money laundering. I am your son. You know me. I would never hurt you. I was just scared of losing everything. Please, Dad, I am begging you. Do not let them put me in a federal prison. I looked down at the top of his head, feeling the damp warmth of his tears soaking through the fabric of my pajama trousers. A father is supposed to feel an overwhelming instinct to protect his child from harm. That instinct is forged in blood and unconditional love. But as I stared down at the pathetic weeping man clinging to my legs, I felt absolutely nothing. The well of my paternal forgiveness had run completely dry. He was no longer the boy I had raised. He was a greedy, desperate coward who had willingly agreed to drug his own father and steal $18 million just to cover up his own catastrophic failures. I reached down and placed my hands firmly on his shoulders. For a brief second, he looked up at me, a glimmer of desperate hope flashing in his bloodshot eyes. He actually believed that my fatherly love would override my sense of justice. He thought he could manipulate my emotions one last time. I gripped his shoulders tightly and physically pushed him away from my legs. He slumped back onto the rug, staring at me in absolute shock. I spent 50 years building a life to protect you, Bradley, I said, my voice low and vibrating with a cold, immovable anger. I laid bricks in the hot Texas sun and negotiated cutthroat contracts so that you would never have to know the meaning of true hardship. I built an empire to ensure your safety and your future. And you took all of that love and you sold my mind and my dignity for a temporary financial bailout. You were perfectly willing to let a corrupt doctor lock me in a psychiatric ward for the rest of my life just so you could pay off a margin call. Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. He looked at my face and finally understood that there was no mercy left for him in this house. The heavy footsteps of Special Agent Miller broke the tense silence. He walked over, dragging a still sobbing Monica behind him. He reached down with his free hand and grabbed Bradley roughly by the collar of his expensive charcoal suit jacket. Agent Miller hauled my son off the floor with effortless strength. Bradley did not even try to resist. He hung limply in this agent's grasp, completely defeated. Bradley Harrison, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud and the attempted chemical endangerment of a senior citizen. Agent Miller declared, his voice loud and authoritative. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The agent spun Bradley around and slammed him face first against the wall next to the arched hallway. The second pair of steel handcuffs came off his belt. He grabbed Bradley's wrists, pulling them sharply behind his back. The loud ratcheting clicks filled the air once more, locking my son into the devastating reality of his own actions. Through the large glass bay windows, I saw the sudden flash of bright lights. The federal tactical team had finally moved in. 3 dark sports utility vehicles with flashing red and blue strobe lights pulled aggressively into the circular driveway. Heavy doors swung open, and several armed federal agents stepped out onto the pristine lawn. I walked slowly toward the window, watching the synchronized display of law enforcement descending upon the beautiful property. Agent Miller pushed Bradley and Monica toward the heavy oak front door. Thomas stepped aside, allowing the parade of disgraced criminals to exit the house. I stood by the glass watching as my son and my daughter-in-law were marched out into the cold morning air. Their wealthy neighbors were already stepping outside, staring in shock. The flashing lights illuminated Bradley's pale face as an agent forced him into the cruiser. I watched through the thick glass of the bay window as the heavy doors of the federal cruisers slammed shut, sealing my son and my daughter-in-law inside their new reality. The red and blue strobe lights painted the manicured lawns of my quiet neighborhood in harsh alternating colors. The vehicles backed out of my circular driveway, the tires crunching loudly against the gravel. I watched them drive down the street until they turned the corner and the flashing lights finally disappeared from view. The heavy silence of the house rushed back in to fill the absolute void entirely. I turned away from the window and let my gaze sweep across the space. The room was a disaster zone of discarded betrayals. The heavy oak dining chair where my son had wept was pushed back at an awkward angle. The pristine Persian rug was scuffed and wrinkled from the brief, violent struggle. And sitting completely paralyzed on the edge of the sofa was Dr. Eris Thorne. He had not moved a single inch since the FBI revealed their presence. He sat with his knees pressed tightly together, gripping his black bag as if it could somehow shield him perfectly. I walked slowly across the room, my footsteps falling in a deliberate, rhythmic cadence against the hardwood floor. I stopped just a few feet away from him. The man who had confidently marched into my home less than an hour ago to officially declare me a vegetative invalid was now trembling like a frightened child. His slicked-back hair had fallen across his sweaty forehead. He looked up at me, his eyes darting frantically, looking for any possible avenue of escape. He found absolutely none in my cold stare. "You came into my home, Dr. Thorne," I said very quietly. "You looked me in the eyes, and you signed a legal document declaring that my mind was completely destroyed. You did this without a single medical test because a greedy woman handed you $25,000 in cash. You sold your professional oath to facilitate the theft of my entire life." He opened his mouth trying to formulate a defense, but his vocal cords simply refused to work. He let out a dry, raspy wheeze and swallowed hard. That was when Thomas stepped out from the arched hallway, walking with the smooth, predatory grace of a very hungry shark. "Dr. Thorne." Thomas began, his voice crisp and completely devoid of empathy. "You are currently facing a multitude of severe federal charges, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud and accessory to the attempted chemical endangerment of a senior citizen. The federal prosecutors will ensure that you never practice medicine again. They will pursue a maximum prison sentence. You will spend the next 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary." The doctor let out a pathetic whimper, dropping his medical bag onto the floor. He pressed his hands against his face, weeping. "Please," he begged through his violently trembling fingers. "I have a family and a private practice," the doctor pleaded. "She promised me it was just a technicality. She said he was actually sick, and the paperwork just needed to be rushed. I did not know about any poisoning or haloperidol." "Ignorance is not a valid legal defense," Thomas replied coldly. "But my client is a pragmatic man. We do not actually care about you. You are an insignificant pawn in a much larger game. Our primary objective is to ensure that Monica and Bradley face the absolute maximum penalties under the law. We want completely airtight criminal convictions. I am going to offer you a single limited opportunity to save yourself from a federal prison cell," Thomas stated. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a fresh manila folder. He opened it and placed a cleanly typed legal document onto the glass coffee table right next to the scattered FBI toxicology reports. "This is a sworn affidavit," Thomas explained. "It is a full, comprehensive confession. It details exactly how Monica contacted you and the cash she paid you to falsify the medical evaluation. It outlines your premeditated intention to declare a perfectly healthy man incompetent. If you sign this document right now and agree to turn state's evidence against them, the FBI will grant you full immunity from prison time. You will still lose your medical license." Thomas added, his tone sharp. "The medical board will revoke your credentials before the end of the week. Your career as a physician is completely over. But you will get to sleep in your own bed tonight instead of a holding cell. The choice is yours." Dr. Thorne did not hesitate for another second. He stared at the paper as if it were a literal physical life raft. He reached into his breast pocket with a shaking hand and pulled out a cheap plastic pen. He leaned forward over the glass coffee table, breathing heavily. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name at the bottom of the affidavit. His signature was a messy, frantic scrawl, but it was legally binding. He dated the document and pushed it back across the table toward my attorney. Thomas picked up the paper, inspecting the signature with a satisfied nod. He slipped the folder back into his jacket as a uniformed federal agent walked right into the room. The agent had stayed behind to secure the scene. He grabbed Dr. Thorne by the arm, pulling him to his feet. "You are coming with me," the agent instructed, leading the disgraced physician toward the door. I watched them walk out. Thomas gave me a respectful nod and let himself out. The house was finally empty. The sirens faded into the distance. I was left standing in the quiet living room, completely alone. I looked down at the coffee table and the hardwood floor. Scattered all around me were the fake medical documents and forged signatures of absolute ultimate betrayal. 6 months later, the crisp autumn air replaced the suffocating humidity of that terrible Friday morning. The changing of the seasons mirrored the profound, permanent shift in my own personal reality. I sat in the back row of a federal courtroom. The benches were made of solid oak. The walls featured dark wood paneling, and the official seal of the United States government hung directly above the judge's bench. The room smelled of polished wood and stale institutional air. It was a sterile, unforgiving environment designed to strip away the illusions of arrogant criminals. I wore a navy suit and did not bring my cane. I sat perfectly upright, resting my hands on my knees. The gallery was mostly empty, except for a few reporters and legal clerks. I did not come to gloat. I came to witness the final closing of a dark chapter in my life. I needed to see the iron doors of justice slam shut with my own eyes. The last 6 months had been a relentless whirlwind of depositions, forensic audits, and endless legal briefings. The federal investigators had systematically dismantled Monica's entire life with ruthless surgical precision, leaving nothing behind. With Dr. Thorne testifying against her and the offshore accounts frozen, she had no leverage left. Her expensive defense attorneys tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the United States attorney refused to entertain any leniency. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. The digital footprints, the wire transfers, the forged documents, and the audio recordings from my living room painted a portrait of a calculated predator. Bradley had fared no better. His hedge fund collapsed entirely when his margin debts were exposed, triggering a cascade of secondary investigations into his corporate practices. He lost the luxury house, the cars, and the curated life he tried to preserve at the cost of my sanity. The heavy side door swung open, and the marshals led them in. They were no longer the arrogant couple who sipped wine at my dining table. Monica wore a shapeless, drab khaki uniform issued by the Federal Detention Center. Her blonde hair had lost its luster and hung limply around her exhausted face. She walked with slumped shoulders, staring blankly at the floor. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes and no patience for criminals, looked down at her from the high bench. "Monica, you orchestrated a highly sophisticated scheme to defraud a vulnerable family member and launder millions of dollars," the judge stated, her voice echoing loudly through the silent courtroom. "Your actions demonstrate a profound lack of morality and capacity for cruelty. For the charges of federal wire fraud, aggravated elder abuse, and conspiracy, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole." The heavy wooden gavel slammed down with a sharp, violent crack. Monica flinched, closing her eyes as the reality of a decade and a half behind bars crushed the remaining breath from her lungs. The judge then turned her piercing gaze toward my son. Bradley stood up. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that swallowed his shrinking frame. He had lost a significant amount of weight over the last 6 months of his incarceration. His hands were shackled tightly together, the heavy steel chains clinking softly in the quiet room. Bradley, the judge, continued, her tone shifting to one of profound, absolute disgust. "You conspired to chemically sedate your own father. You willfully participated in a plot to strip away his dignity and his freedom simply to cover your own reckless financial failures. Your greed blinded you to the most basic human obligations. For your active role in this conspiracy and your failure to report a major federal crime, you are sentenced to 8 years in a federal correctional facility." The gavel struck the wooden block a second time. The sound echoed in my chest, but it did not break my heart. My heart had already hardened into an impenetrable stone the night I listened to him barter my life away on that hidden camera recording. The federal marshals stepped forward, taking Bradley by the arms, to lead him toward the holding cells at the side of the courtroom. As he turned to walk away, he stopped. He looked over the wooden railing separating the gallery from the defense tables and scanned the empty benches until his eyes locked directly onto mine. His face was a tragic mask of absolute despair. His eyes were red and brimming with tears. He stood there trembling slightly in his bright orange jumpsuit, the heavy cold steel chains binding his wrists, and he looked at me with the desperate pleading expression of a lost little boy. He was silently begging for a nod. He was begging for a small, sad smile. He was desperately searching for any tiny microscopic sign that his father still loved him, that I would somehow wait for him or forgive him for what he had done. I stood in perfect silence and looked back at him across the vast dividing expanse of the federal courtroom. I felt the cool, conditioned air brushing against my face. I remembered the terrible silence on the phone line when Monica realized I had given the chocolates away. I remembered the absolute coldness in his voice when he agreed to drug me for a financial bailout. I did not offer a single nod. I did not force a sympathetic smile to comfort him. I simply held his tearful gaze for 3 incredibly long seconds, letting him see the total, unyielding emptiness that now resided permanently in my eyes. Then, without a single word of farewell, I slowly turned my back to him. I walked with steady steps down the center aisle of the courtroom, pushing open the heavy double doors. I stepped out into the bright, warm sunlight of the city, leaving him behind in the dark forever. The toxic biological tie that had bound us together was now permanently severed. I stepped out of the bright, warm sunlight and took a deep breath of clean, fresh air. The heavy burden weighing down my shoulders was finally gone. Over the next few weeks, I decided to reclaim the spaces tainted by greed. I hired contractors to completely renovate my house. We tore up the carpets and replaced the hardwood floors. We painted the walls a welcoming shade of white. I had the antique glass cabinet permanently removed. I wanted absolutely no reflections of the past to haunt my future. The house was no longer a silent mausoleum holding ghosts of betrayal. It was a new sanctuary built on my own terms. I sat in a comfortable wicker chair on my newly constructed back porch, listening to the gentle evening breeze rustling through the large oak trees. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and fresh cedar wood. It was late afternoon, and the sky was beginning to turn a brilliant shade of gold. I was not alone. The heavy sliding glass door opened, and Victor stepped out onto the porch. He was not carrying a briefcase or a stack of frightening laboratory reports. He was carrying a crystal decanter filled with 20-year-old single malt bourbon and 2 heavy glass tumblers. He walked over with a relaxed, easy smile that I had not seen on his face since before this entire nightmare began. He set the glasses down on the small wooden table between us. He poured the dark amber liquid into the glasses and handed one to me. The crystal felt solid and grounding in my hand. I raised the glass and we clinked them together lightly. We did not need to offer a verbal toast. The quiet clinking sound was enough to acknowledge everything we had survived together. I took a slow sip, letting the rich, warm liquid burn smoothly down my throat. I looked at Victor sitting across from me. He had stood by my side when my own flesh and blood had tried to destroy my mind. He had risked his own safety to uncover the truth and protect my life. It was a profound realization that settled deeply into my heart. Blood does not automatically make someone your family. Loyalty, respect, and unwavering support are the true foundations of a family. As we sat enjoying the peaceful quiet, a black town car pulled into my driveway. Thomas, my lead corporate attorney, stepped out carrying his familiar leather briefcase. He walked around to the back porch and greeted us with a rare, genuine smile. He set his briefcase on the table and pulled out a thick stack of freshly printed legal documents. These were not fraudulent medical evaluations or fake mortgage loans. This was my brand new last will and testament. I had spent the last 2 months working closely with Thomas to completely restructure my entire estate. I wanted to ensure that my legacy would never again become a tool for greed or corruption. Thomas handed me a smooth black pen and pointed to the dotted line at the bottom of the final page. I looked down at the paper and read the final stipulations of the trust. The entire $18 million fund was being permanently diverted. Not a single cent would ever go to anyone who shared my last name. Instead, the money was establishing a comprehensive scholarship foundation for underprivileged architecture students. It would provide full tuition housing and career placement for young men and women who had the talent and the drive, but lacked the financial resources to achieve their dreams. I was taking the wealth I had built from laying bricks and using it to help a new generation build their own futures. It was the perfect vindication. I placed the tip of the pen against the paper. My hand was perfectly steady. There was no tremor and no hesitation. I signed my name with bold, sweeping strokes. Thomas witnessed the signature and stamped the document with his official notary seal. He shook my hand warmly and congratulated me on the new foundation. We watched him walk back to his car and drive away, leaving Victor and me alone once again on the quiet porch. The sun was dipping lower on the horizon, casting long, peaceful shadows across the manicured lawn. Victor reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped rectangular box. He leaned forward and placed it gently on the table right next to my glass of bourbon. I looked at the box and then up at my oldest friend with a questioning gaze. He offered a warm, knowing smile and simply nodded toward the gift. I reached out and untied the golden ribbon. I pulled back the crisp wrapping paper and opened the lid. Inside, resting in delicate paper cups, were 6 pieces of genuine imported Swiss chocolate. There were no hidden pharmaceutical drugs and no toxic sedatives. It was just a pure, simple gift from a man who truly cared about my well-being. I picked up a piece of the dark chocolate and took a slow, deliberate bite. The rich, sweet flavor melted perfectly on my tongue. I closed my eyes for a brief second, savoring the taste and the profound irony of the moment. A box of chocolates had started this entire terrible journey, and now a box of chocolates was marking its beautiful conclusion. I opened my eyes and looked at the vibrant setting sun. The sky was painted in strokes of orange, pink, and deep purple. I am 79 years old. My hair is entirely gray, and my hip still aches. But as I sat watching the day end, I realized I had never felt more alive. My mind is sharper than ever, and my spirit is completely free. The trap they set had shattered against my resolve. I took another sip of bourbon and smiled. The night was approaching, but I was no longer afraid of the dark.